All right, everyone. It's 9:05. We're going to start. The Congressman has a busy schedule, of course, and we are again very grateful, Congressman Bowman, for your agreeing to take the time to speak to us. I want to give you a sense of who's here, because you don't necessarily see the room. We have our middle school. Just about all of our middle school is here, and we have representatives from our high school. I know you love middle school. You were a middle school principal. You can talk about that in a moment. So we got probably about 300 students here together, some of them on their own devices, some of them on their classroom devices. We have the student leaders from the high school who are particularly engaged in the political action committee or political group. I don't know if they're raising money, but they're involved in kind of getting people to understand what's going on locally. They just hosted a city council debate with, there's a special election coming up here, as you know. And they hosted a debate that was viewed by the whole community, which was great. And they have some questions for you, but that's basically who you have here. We were blessed to have you come, I think, in around October, before you were formally elected. But at the beginning of the school year, you came to visit. We had a great visit around the school. And we got to know each other over the course of the last couple of months, and so that's a relationship that I treasure, and I look forward to continuing, to develop. I want to start by wishing you condolences on the loss of your beloved mother, Pauline. When we spoke for the first time, or when we spoke a few weeks ago, a little bit more than that, you told me that she was sick, and that's connected to this pandemic that we're part of. And then I know that a few weeks ago she passed, and I know how much, of course, she means to you and to your family. We talked about some of the customs of Shiva. Shiva is a number which is 7, which is the first 7 days where you're really in our custom, people stay home because it's even hard to get out, and then you actually gradually move out of that stage. The next stage is called Shloshim. It's the 30 days where you're starting to re-enter into society and hopefully take those messages that you've learned from your mother to bring comfort to other people and to make the world a better place. And then after that, there are stages after that. So you're really still in some of those early stages of mourning, and I am sure that informs what you do and how much it means to you. Maybe you could open by just telling us a little bit about your mother, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. Good morning, Benny. Can I call you Benny in
You
front of?
can, absolutely.
Okay. Good morning to you, and good morning to everyone on this call. It's always like exciting and inspiring to be on these calls with students. You know, as you mentioned, I was in education for 20 years, and for the last 10 years, I served as a middle school principal. And prior to that, I did work in a high school for 3 years. So I definitely have love for our high school students. And then in the beginning of my career, I started as an elementary school teacher. So I've been a teacher, school counselor, and school principal working within K to 12 schools. So whenever I get to see kids or be around kids, like I'm just super excited and inspired, and I get goosebumps. Even though, it's good to see your beautiful, not full faces, but your beautiful eyes, kids. And thank you all so much for being here. Yeah, absolutely. For me, everything starts with my mother. My mother raised 4 of us. I have 3 sisters, and I have 2 older and 1 younger. We lived on the Upper East Side in East Harlem section of Manhattan. I'm 44 years old, about to be 45, born in 76. So I grew up late 70s, throughout the 80s, throughout the 90s, and that's sort of where I came of age. Yeah, my mother was everything to me. She still is everything to me. I often don't speak about her in the past tense because I believe her spirit is with me, and her spirit has always guided me when she was here physically, but now spiritually. And my mother was a postal worker. She worked in the post office for 33 years. She was a member of the Postal Workers Union. And she I always tell people she gave me 3 things. She gave me love, she gave me stability, a stable and safe home, and she gave me self-confidence. She told me that I could be anything that I wanted to be, and I believed her. And I kind of kept that in the back of my mind, growing up in Manhattan on the Upper East Side in East Harlem, because there were a lot of distractions. and a lot of peer pressure and a lot of things you could get yourself into that can ultimately really, really hurt you or even kill you. So I grew up, Benny, during the crack cocaine epidemic, and I don't know how much your students know about this, but crack cocaine was a devastating drug that harmed the entire country, but it specifically harmed the African American community. And unfortunately, one of my sisters struggled with drug addiction, and so it really hit my family personally. And then many of my friends and family members struggled with it either in terms of addiction or in terms of the impact regarding interaction with law enforcement. So it was a tough time. It was a violent time. And I have many friends and family members who were incarcerated and or killed during this time because it was just so rough. And I guess it was then where I started to think about the world in a more global context, and I guess asking the question, why is the world this way? Why do certain communities go through such harm and trauma and despair, and other communities don't? And for the African American community in the crack cocaine epidemic, it was like, how did these drugs get into our community? Where did they come from? And how do we get them out? Was a big question. And my mom, helped me to navigate that. And let me say one other thing, Benny, before you go to your next question. I was very fortunate, not just because of who my mother was, but because of state policy that allowed us to live in rent control apartments. So what that means is, the apartments weren't market rate. My mother was able to pay rent based on her salary from the post office. And as a result, we lived in a diverse middle-class community. And diverse is the key word, because I was lucky enough to grow up with children and kids from all over the world. I have friends who are Italian, Irish, Jamaican, African, Arab, Jewish, everything. I grew up with all kinds of kids. And it was great because we got to learn about sort of each other's culture and history as we were kids growing up. All kids want the same things. We just want to play and have a good time and explore and be curious. But imagine having that curiosity with kids from different cultures from all over the world. So now you're learning about culture and you're curious at the same time, and you realize that we have a lot more in common than we don't. So yeah, man, I owe everything I am to my mom and everything I was.
Well, may her memory be a blessing and continue to give you strength and both comfort and strength to do the good things that you're doing. Again, they got background noise over here, but that's the morning prayers, and it's all good. And hope I'll try to mute myself when you're talking. Okay, so you're a principal. You grew up in Manhattan. You're a school principal. You're a successful school principal. You're involved in education. Then you go decide to be a politician. How does that happen? Why did you do that? And do you regret it?
Well, no, I don't regret it. I'm actually really excited and humbled to be here. So first of all, slight correction. I don't consider myself to be a politician. I consider myself to be a public servant. And, becoming an elected official and being a public servant it obviously gives me an opportunity to have an even larger impact than I was having as a middle school principal. So I was a middle school principal for 10 and a half years. And we did great work in that school, in terms of not just academic achievement, but the social and emotional growth of our kids. And we exposed them to so many opportunities in terms of curriculum with technology and sports and innovation and creativity, but also with outside experiences, visiting Niagara Falls, visiting Washington, D.C., embedding like school trips as part of our curriculum and culture, but also just being a safe space for kids who might be going through tremendous trauma, outside of the school building. I worked in something called a Title I school, and throughout my career, I worked in Title I schools. And these are schools that are historically underfunded and schools located within historically neglected communities. So these are kids who live and come to school full of passion, full of ideas, full of excitement, but unfortunately live in communities without many resources. and live in what we call red line communities. So these are communities that were on purpose through federal policy sort of isolated from the American dream, while the American dream was given to other groups of people. So we did great work over the 10 years that I was middle school principal, but I still had kids, who had to go back into their communities without resources and who were dealing with tremendous harm. And for me, the tipping point happened the year before I decided to run for office. 34 children died within the K to 12 school system in the Bronx, and 17 died died by suicide. And one child committed suicide right across the highway from my school because she was being bullied in school. And then there were other children being harmed in neighboring schools. And I just got to the point where I was very frustrated with, our elected officials not centering our children in our political discourse, and particularly our children who are most vulnerable. We should not, we always boast that we're the wealthiest nation on earth and we're the most powerful nation on earth, but we have tens of millions of kids living in poverty. And we have millions of kids suffering with mental distress and housing insecurity and food insecurity and all these things. And it's avoidable if our elected official prioritize those who are most vulnerable and do more to help them. So all of that led to me, deciding to run for office, and we were blessed enough to win. And now that I'm here, I just feel like I have a voice and an opportunity to have a bigger impact and to do more.
Okay. And would it be accurate to say that what you just described, education, children, is on the top of your agenda, one of the top items of your agenda?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and not just in terms of education, but in terms of housing, in terms of healthcare, in terms of food security, in terms of safe places to play, in terms of job development. I mean, everything starts with our children are our most precious resource, and our seniors, right? So
Right.
my political agenda starts with making sure those two groups are taken care of. And if we build around them, our most precious resource and the most vulnerable, then we build a better country.
Okay. Okay. Well, good luck to you. Now, it didn't take too long for it to get pretty active. January 6th, were you in Washington on January 6th?
Yes, I was.
So that was your first week of work?
Yeah, I was sworn in on January 3rd, and then January 6th happened. Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
It was crazy. I was one of the lucky ones because I wasn't in the Capitol. I was in my office, which is like right across the street from the Capitol. And I was just hoping and praying that they didn't turn their attention to our offices. But it was just crazy to see. It was the day where we were certifying the election results, which is standard operating procedure, is what we always do, certify the results of the Electoral College. And unfortunately, this mob of people got riled up enough to believe that, they could storm the Capitol, possibly harm or kill us, and overturn the election results so that Donald Trump can remain president. And it was almost like unreal to watch, because I couldn't, it's the US Capitol. We have Capitol Police, we have safety there, we should be well protected. So to see this mob sort of get past the police and get into the Capitol and walk around with these symbols of hate, like the Confederate flag, walking through the Capitol with the Confederate flag. They erected a noose outside of the Capitol building and erected a giant cross. And, you're a Black man in America, you know what a noose means, and you know what a giant cross means. It conjures up the history of lynching in this country, and specifically the lynching of Black people. And the cross, the Ku Klux Klan would often burn crosses outside of Black homes throughout American history. So this was an insurrection by white nationalists who believe that, the white race is the ruler of the country, and the world for that matter, and they should be in power no matter what. Forget democracy, forget one person, one vote. we're gonna rule by force. So it was incredibly scary. But this may sound weird, but I wasn't like super shocked. And what I mean by that is, if you look throughout American history, whenever there's social progress, there's backlash from white nationalists in particular. So the day before January 6th, January 5th, in Georgia, which is a historically Republican state, Georgia sent its first Jewish and its first African American senators to the Senate, to Washington. They both won their elections. They won their runoff elections. So we know white nationalists, they share a hate for Jews and a hate for Black people. So that happened January 5th, and on January 6th was the insurrection. But throughout history, this always happens. I mean, once we passed the 13th Amendment, 1865, to free the slaves, not too long after that, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, was killed. Uh, African Americans built their own community in Tulsa, Oklahoma, often called Black Wall Street. White nationalists burned it down. And this whole idea of, keeping the country in the hands of one group of people is what continues to lead to this unfortunate savage behavior, and it's, like I said, it's international. So the slaughter at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the slaughter at the AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and the Christchurch massacre in New Zealand, I believe, where the Jewish community was attacked, the Black community was attacked, and the Muslim community was attacked. And this is unfortunately the reality we have to deal with in Washington. And 2 days later, we had our first bill. It gave us the opportunity to write our first bill, and to investigate exactly what happened, and to investigate if there are any connections between white nationalists and law enforcement.
You feel safe now? I mean, you say you went through that. You feel, I mean,
yeah, I feel safe. More than anything, I'm just concerned about my my wife and kids. I mean, that's what I'm most concerned about. But there are many members of Congress who have 24-hour surveillance and security because they are constantly getting threats, constantly. And not just Democrats, Republicans too. Any Republican who stood up to the insurrectionists and stood up to Donald Trump, they're now getting these threats from people who believe that, Donald Trump was telling the truth, that the election was stolen, even though there's no evidence to prove that at all. And 60 courts shot down that presumption. So, I feel safe, yes, but there are many members of Congress who have 24-hour surveillance because of the unfortunate belief that these people have.
are you hopeful that there are better times ahead, that people will come together, even if they disagree with each other, that people are going to learn how to talk to each other in ways that are more civil? You think you can contribute to that? I think you can contribute to that. I've spoken to you, and I think you can contribute to that. But I'd like to hear from you.
No, I appreciate that. I'm always hopeful. I'm an eternal optimist, and I think I got that from my mom too. The reason why I love talking to kids, because it's going to be the kids who ultimately create a world that's better than what we have now. But I'm not too old. I'm only 44. Hopefully, I have many decades left, and it gives me the opportunity to do that work as well. So I'm hopeful, yes, and I'm going to do the work. So this is, I think education is a big part of it. This false belief that you are better than someone else because of your race or your gender or your religion or your culture. It's just a false belief. We are all human, and we share this world together, and we need to figure out how to live on it together. And the world is big enough and abundant enough, in my opinion, where we can all have our space to live safely and securely, but also live with each other. So that's my foundational belief. In addition, I think education is key. I think what our kids learn in our schools is key. So I think it's important for us, and I'm going to be introducing this in Congress in the coming weeks. but a curriculum that's multicultural, a curriculum that's anti-racist and anti-hate, a curriculum that uplifts everyone, where we can learn about every group's contribution to the world. I think that helps create the empathy, and that's the key word, empathy, that's needed, not just for me as an elected official to govern, but how we live with each other on this planet. I think empathy is the most powerful force in the world, empathy and love.
Okay. Now, you were originally supposed to speak to us during Black History Month, and because of your mother's passing, we moved that. But I think it's important to talk about. I mean, let's get to the basics. What is it? Why is it important? What do you want us, the members of this school, the kids in this school, the members of your district, to know about Black History Month?
Yeah, so it's essential, right? It goes back to what I just said. You know, we are all sharing this country and this planet together, and in order for us to share it together peacefully, we should learn about ourselves and each other. And we have to understand, historically, throughout American history, Black history wasn't even taught in our schools. You know, Black history was completely erased. I mean, just imagine, right, being, you know, my ancestors forcefully taken from their country and from their continent, you know, brought to a foreign place. You know, you don't know your religion, you don't know your language, you don't know your real name, and you don't know your history. And for 244 years as slaves, you weren't allowed to learn it. And you weren't allowed to learn anything because you weren't allowed to learn to read and write. So Black History Month, which started as Black History Week, is a process of righting the wrongs of that history, but it's also a process of teaching the whole world about the contributions of Black people, not just African Americans, but the diaspora. So people from the West Indies, people from the continent of Africa, indigenous people in Australia, Brazil, and other places. So for Black people, it's about learning about ourselves so that we can have a secure sense of identity. And for others, it's about learning that, you know, Black people were more than slaves. You know, we have contributions to the nation and the world that started before slavery, that started in ancient Egypt, ancient Africa, etc. So it's just important for us to learn about ourselves and each other, as I'm sure, you know, SAR does every day. You know, learn about yourself, connect to who you are, so you can have a strong sense of who you are. And I think the more we do that, the more we develop empathy for others, especially when we learn about them as well.
Sure. I think that is true. We do obviously spend a lot of time learning about ourselves, and we also want others to understand, you know, who we are, and you know, the contributions that we make and the differences that we can make in the world. So I completely agree with that. I just read you're all over social media, whether it's Twitter or Instagram, and I actually just saw, correct me if I'm wrong, you're going to Alabama this week?
Yes, I went to Alabama on.
Or you went last week?
I went on Friday. To support workers at Amazon who are trying to form a union. So I was out there with some of my colleagues supporting organized labor, which is another, you know, sort of priority of our office, because we want to make sure every worker in the country, regardless of who they work for, you know, they should be able to earn a wage where they could take care of themselves and their families. They should have access to universal health care. They should have paid leave, whether it's sick leave or vacation time. They should have paid time when they have a child and they want to help raise their family. And they should be treated, more importantly, with dignity and respect at all times. So we learned at Amazon in Alabama, this particular Amazon, but Amazon across the world has been criticized for this. They've really been mistreating their workers. So their workers are trying to form a union so they could collectively bargain and protect themselves and empower themselves. So I was out there in support of their workers.
There are a lot of questions coming, and we have a private chat. I'm going to give you some of those questions because I really want you to hear the voices of our students, and
of course,
see how
please,
much time we have. One of them, well, before we get to that, obviously the stimulus plan, the American Rescue Plan, is back at the House now, I believe, right? In other words,
yes.
It was passed by the House, went to the Senate modified it, and now it's back in your court, so to speak. Maybe you can tell us tell us about it. Tell us whether you like it, whether you don't like it, whether you're going to vote for it, if you're allowed to release that information, and what you think is what you think it's going to do.
So I like it a lot. I don't absolutely love it because they took out $15 minimum wage. We need to continue to fight for a $15 minimum wage because we have many workers across the country who are earning a minimum wage. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. Now imagine trying to live on $7.25 an hour. Even $15 is not enough and not where we need to be. But the minimum wage is too low federally, so we have to increase it to $15 at the least, and then index it so it continues to grow with inflation and GDP. So I'm upset that that's not in the bill. But what is in the bill is an expansion of the earned income tax credit, expansion of the child tax credit, which will lift tens of millions of people out of poverty, cut African-American poverty in half, which is huge. Investments in vaccinations, investments in childcare, and education in a really big way. So, I'm 85% there with the bill, but we have to get right back to the table to fight for a $15 minimum wage because we have to do that this Congress because we don't know what's going to happen next year or the year after. We don't know what's going to happen going forward, so we got to get it done now. And then the other thing I want to mention, not directly connected to this stimulus package, is something called a filibuster. So we're using a process called reconciliation to pass this stimulus and the next stimulus, which is coming in a few weeks. But after that, we need to pass real laws that are healthy for democracy. And the filibuster, which happens in the Senate, which stops laws from passing, is something we have to address. But I'll keep that topic for another time.
Okay, I know that one of the things I've been reading about is that there's funding for schools in this bill. And one of our students asked, first of all, if you could talk about the funding for schools, and also we're a private school, so the funding that we get from government is limited. Do you think that private schools should be getting funding from the government with this stimulus in general, and why or why not?
Well, I know there's a PPP aspect of the stimulus where private schools have access to low interest loans. I think any school that needs funds should be able to get funds, whether it's loans or grants or whatever capacity, they should be able to receive those funds. But yes, there's $130 billion allocated for K-12 schools in this particular budget. So that is in this particular stimulus. So that's tremendous. It's going to provide opportunities to hire more teachers, to deal with the issue of learning loss, to help kids with technology, to provide summer learning opportunities as well, to close the gaps that have grown during this time, to retrofit schools so they are safer when kids return with HVAC systems and circulation systems. But then there's also a focus on early childhood education as well and child care. So a lot of focus on K-12 schools. Now, what needs to happen here in this state and across the country, we need to make sure governors supplement the funding, not supplant the funding. And what that means is governors should not take the money from the federal government and use that money to cover losses in their state budget. The federal government money is to support the state budget, not to replace it. So our governor here we have to make sure our governor here doesn't do that because he did it before with CARES 1 and CARES 2, supplanting $800 million that didn't go to our highest needs schools. So we got to continue to work there also.
Yeah, that sounds like an important thing to do. If I can switch topics, a lot of students are asking about Israel. This is a school that our students are deeply connected to Israel. We're obviously deeply connected to this country and to America and to the values here. And at the same time, we're connected to the state of Israel. My parents live in Israel. We have many people, graduates of the school, who have lived in Israel, who have fought in the Israel Defense Forces, and it's a deep connection in this country. It's a deep connection in this community. And the question, I'm just going to ask one of them. Sorry. Well, we'll start with a hard one. Please ask Mr. Bowman what his views on BDS are. I'm very curious of the subject, and someone who cares so much about Israel would have very strong views on this topic. So that's something that students here care about.
Yeah. So I do not support BDS as a way to engage our ally Israel. But I'm not against free speech. So if individuals choose to boycott whatever they want to boycott, that's their individual choice. But it's not something that I support. Israel is an ally, and Israel is a country we want to maintain very strong relationships with and connection with. But because they're an ally, it doesn't mean we don't sometimes critique, our allies, because we want them to be better and do the best they can, not just in their country, but in their region, as far as how they engage with surrounding countries. So it's a relationship we want to maintain and keep strong. It's a relationship where, members of Congress will not always agree, but that's not just with Israel, that's with all of our allies. But the goal here is to make sure we are uplifting human rights, not just in Israel, but across the world, no matter what. And I think that should be our focus. In Israel, we have a Palestinian community that lives there as well. And we want to make sure we're treating them with dignity and respect and uplifting their human rights while they're in Israel. That's something we want to continue to talk about as well. Just the same way in this country, we want to make sure that we're treating all citizens, regardless of their background, with love and dignity and respect.
One of our teachers asked if you could clarify where you stand on the two-state solution. Is that something that you advocate for, that you believe in?
Yes, I support a two-state solution, and I'm very frustrated that throughout my entire life, I've been hearing about two-state solution, and we don't seem no closer to that solution. So it's definitely something I support, and I want to figure out how to lend my voice to that conversation so that we could get closer to a two-state solution where both states have the opportunity for self-determination. Unfortunately, we're not there yet, but hopefully we can get there soon.
Okay, I want to just say we've had a couple of conversations. We were on a meeting with about 10 local rabbis in Riverdale and Westchester. And we think that these conversations are important as we continue to develop a relationship and to talk about things that are going on both here and in Israel and around the world. So we appreciate your openness to talking about that. Really, really do. Somebody wants to know about the vaccinations. There was some conversations, articles about the vaccinations, about Palestinians being vaccinated. One of our students asked for you to acknowledge that Palestinians are being vaccinated, and have you learned anything about that? And has your position evolved around that in terms of what you're reading?
So I'm going to be meeting with the Israeli consulate sometime soon. So I'll have more concrete data on exactly the number of Palestinians being vaccinated. I know there's that vaccination not only has started, but has grown, since my initial letter. So I need to get some more concrete numbers around that. It's interesting, journalists report stories and, you take some of the information from stories, but you want to go to the actual source, which is why I'm going to be meeting with the consulate. But I did hear that vaccinations have started and they have grown. So that's good. But when I meet with the consulate, I'll have more concrete sort of numbers around that.
Eitan, thank you. Eitan Senger, you can ask your question. Go ahead. Eitan Senger is one of the two leaders of the political club in the high school, and he actually reached out to your office to ask you to speak. So I want to give him the opportunity to ask his question if he's here personally, if we could find him. If not, I'll ask him for him. Go ahead, Eitan.
Thank you so much, Congressman, and thank you, Rabbi Krause. So I guess from from the days we started preschool and like your younger education, you're always told to share and to work things out with your classmates. And right now, in this political environment, bipartisanship is something which is very hard to come by. I mean, the recent stimulus bill passed completely on party lines, and even that was a struggle to get everyone to agree with. So as like someone who's an educator yourself, I assume you also told your students to work things out with their peers and share and find a way to make solutions even when they disagree on certain stuff. So like what message do you have for students and teachers who still try to work things out and don't want to just give up this spirit of working things out in bipartisanship in today's climate?
Well, we have to continue to keep the spirit of working things out, no matter what. We are a democracy. We are a society where we have to work together. Everyone's voice matters and everyone experiences matter, which is great. But we still have to come together to serve the entire country. And I think, unfortunately, our last president contributed to the hyper partisanship that we see in Congress right now. You know, this us versus them mentality and this scarcity mindset and scarcity based mentality. You know, as I mentioned before, I think reasonable people can always come to a solution to whatever the problem is. But right now, at this moment, it seems to be hyper partisanship, especially because, you know, I have colleagues, you know, Republican colleagues in the House and Senate who are going to challenge the results of the Electoral College in the election. And that's a direct challenge to our democracy. And even after the insurrection, then the insurrection happens. And then after that, many Republicans were still challenging the results, even though they saw that for the first time since 1812, we had an attack on our country from what some people would call domestic terrorists. And then, you know, fast forward, there were members who you know, did not vote to impeach or convict Donald Trump, you know, when we moved to impeach him. So there's just, you know, there's a lot of partisanship right now. I'm one of the people who wants to bring it back together, and there are many others who are. Hopefully time will heal some of these wounds and we're able to work together in the near future. But that spirit of democracy is critical, because I don't want to live in a country that's ruled by a king or queen, and where I'm oppressed and my voice doesn't matter. And if that king decides to, you know, terrorize, incarcerate, or kill me, they can do it at the snap of a finger. In a democracy, that should not happen. And that's why when you look at, you know, everything, there's so much wrong with our country, but there's so much right about it too. And when you look at history and how we've grown to where we are now, it's really a tremendous accomplishment. I mean, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for, you know, the abolitionist movement, members of Congress passing the 13th Amendment, the civil rights movement, members of Congress passing the Voting Rights and Civil Rights Act, and then people in this district exercising their voice and their power. So, you know, we've come a long way. I think we've had a setback, but I think we're going to respond in a very strong way. So I know it's a long answer to your question, but I am hopeful that we can do better. And as I said before, it's going to be the young people, continued education of young people, new generations that are going to put us in the best position possible.
Thank you, Ethan. And Congressman. I want to be respectful of your time. And
Oh, it's 45 already.
45 is 9:45, so we're going to let you be. I just want to ask you if you can. Hopefully, I know that you've been vaccinated, and we're getting vaccinated. We hope that the pace is gonna move up. We've actually tried to get a vaccination site here in Riverdale. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit, because it's been a little slow to get it off the ground.
Yes, absolutely.
We really hope that we'll be able to gather together soon, and hopefully be able to come to visit us in school soon. But you can answer that question first.
No, absolutely. I just want to make a quick point. So absolutely working on a vaccine site in Riverdale and Mount Vernon in particular. Like, I know Riverdale was like, a lot of people don't know this, but this started in Riverdale. Like the pandemic started there, and SAR was like the first place to close down because it started there. So we're working on those two places, Riverdale and Mount Vernon specifically. But I'm excited that we have a huge mass vaccination site in Yonkers. Yonkers, as you know, was also hit very hard. So we fought to get that, and we got that. They're going to be vaccinating 1,000 people per day. And we also have a huge site in Co-op City that just opened on Saturday, another area that was hit incredibly hard and continues to be hit hard, and they're going to vaccinate 1,000 a day as well. So, you know, the more vaccines come online, which they just did from Johnson & Johnson, the more we're able to open sites. And I'm one of those people that's kind of relentless and savvy in working this to make sure we get what we need. So stay tuned, sir.
Yeah, let's keep those numbers up. And thank you again.
Thank
We
you.
hope to see you in person soon. Stay safe. and continue doing good work. And we look forward to continued conversations. Thank you for making the time for us.
Thank you. Peace and love, everyone. Bye, kids. Bye, kids.
Bye, everyone.